Hey everyone, I'm Norm. Welcome to Breaking Back, a tennis podcast by fans, for fans, covering all aspects of the game with an unfiltered lens. And I'm here with my co-hosts, Peter and Chris. Welcome to Breaking Back.
Hey everybody, welcome to Breaking Back, presented by Portland, Maine's Lone Pine Brewing Company and their new Juice Punch Hazy IPA. Now available in all distribution markets. Visit lonepinebrewery.com to find it nearby. And if you happen to be in Maine, Lone Pine's tasting room at Old Orchard Beach is now officially open. They're serving crafted pizzas, lobster flights, and red snappas, as they say up here in New England, among other things. And their tasting room at Rock Row in Westbrook is opening May 24th. And both locations, by the way, are also serving their brand new hot-off-the-shelf Lone Pine vodka. So thank you to Lone Pine and our good friends. Salud.
Excellent. Well, we'll have to get some vodka next time. Oh, that could lead downhill. But it's springtime in Maine, and so people are grabbing their gear that's been in the closet for a long time. They're getting ready to play some tennis. And one of the things that I always find interesting is that people know me as a tennis fan and are always asking, what kind of racket should I have? What do I put in it? And I tell them it's all about the string. And so I'm really excited that we have Curt Stefan here with us today, who's going to tell us about his background in stringing and really why it all starts with what you put inside. It's kind of like the Fish song, the tires are the things that make contact with the road. It's the same is very true in tennis. So a little bit about Curt before we jump in. Curt's the owner of Custom Tennis Rackets. He's been in the business for almost 40 years, serving initially as a producer and editor of Tennis Magazine TV show in the 80s and early 90s. He worked for a number of years for Warren Bosworth, who, if you understand the legends of tennis when it comes to equipment and stringing, it all starts with Warren or goes back to him. Much like there's coaching trees in the NFL and other sports, Warren sits at the top of that. So definitely want to hear some about that from Curt. And currently serving as owner and president of Custom Tennis Rackets down in Delray. And just some of the people that Curt has strung for, to give you some context, Yvonne Lendl, Sampras, Michael Chang, Aaron Krickstein, Pat Rafter, Todd Martin, Andy Murray, Casper Ruud, obviously still in the top 10, and then Jesse Levine, Marcos Bagdatis, J.J. Wolf on the men's side. And for the women, the great Martina Navratilova, Monica Seles, Yana Novotna, Mary Jo Fernandez, my favorite announcer, Vanya King, Jessica Pegula, our top American up there with Coco Gauff, and a couple others, Madison Keys, Lauren Davis, Shelby Rogers, and Leila Fernandez, all toiling on the tour at this moment. So without further ado, Curt, welcome to our podcast.
Thanks, guys. Glad to be here.
Well, let's jump right in. And I know I gave a little bit of your background, but just talk about how, your history with the game and how you got into stringing and racket customization.
We're going to go back probably about 40 years, I guess. We can go back a little bit. I originally played tennis in high school for a couple of years, moved to Florida from Ohio, went to college for commercial advertising, and got into TV production. As you mentioned, the Tennis Magazine show I produced and edited for about 3 years. Company went under, and I walked down the hall to Warren Bosworth's office, who is the guru of customizing rackets for the top pros in the world. The one gentleman that worked with him, you guys might had heard his name, is Nate Ferguson, which I became good friends with. He brought me in, and between him and Warren trained me. So I consider those guys like the elite of the customizing guys and stringing guys in the business. I learned from the best, obviously. They liked me because I didn't have any bad habits, so they can teach me the way that they wanted to have it done the right way as they preferred. And then got a chance to work with many pros. And a lot of the pros would come into town for training, and I would go on the court with a couple of those guys or girls. They would also ship. At that time, FedEx was huge for us. We would ship around the world. Many times I remember stringing rackets and shipping to Europe before the French Open. As of now, we would ship 20 rackets to Yvonne or 20 rackets to Monica Seles. And then obviously if they need something quick, they could have the tournament stringer do it. But if we had the chance to do it, we would do it for them and send it over. So there was that. And then after 21 years, unfortunately, Warren had passed away and their business moved in a different direction. And I started my own. I've been doing it for 12 years on my own now.
How does somebody back in the day, maybe you could talk a little about how you got connected to a player and what that interaction was like? Did they specifically come to Delray to see you like at the beginning or before the beginning of the season? Like they're setting up a new contract perhaps with a supplier and they want to, get the frame dialed in. Like talk about that process and maybe what it was like then and what it's like now.
Back then, when I was working with Warren, he obviously was the guru and has been around since the early 70s and worked with a lot of manufacturers. So the manufacturers would go to Warren and have him do the customization for their top players. So the players could play with the racket comfortably and have something that they felt confident in. Warren knew everybody in the industry and everybody came to him basically. And then once I moved on with my own business, everything was word of mouth. I take a lot of pride in doing good business. So when somebody hears and I work with somebody, my name gets spread. This last fall, I think I had 4 different pros come to me for stringing on the off season because they heard from other pros. It's a small circle, tennis circle. When they heard this guy's good, this guy's bad, this guy's whatever, I got a lot of business thrown my way that way. And my whole business was based on word of mouth and a little social networking, and that's it. It's been working out. I've been keeping busy.
Word of mouth, Curt, is so powerful. I mean, these athletes are so superstitious. I mean, if you strung my racket, if I'm Yvonne Lendl or Pete Sampras, and you dial it in and I end up winning the next Grand Slam tournament, you're my guy. I'm thinking you're stringing my racket for the next tournament, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe speak to that. How nuanced are some of these players that you string for and or superstitious in particular, I guess?
They're not as bad as baseball players, but they have their little quirks, so to speak. A lot of it is with the string, it's consistency. If you can be consistent more than anything, I think that's what they fall in love with because when they put it in their hand, they know exactly what they're getting. So my thing is, I got a couple machines. I keep them tight, keep them set up exactly the same. I string exactly the same. So they know what they're getting every time. That kind of plays a lot into the quality of what they're going to get and what they're confident in.
And I guess to get a little technical, I have strung rackets since I was probably 13. I had a guy that I played with. He had a stringer and he handed me his old drop weight stringer back in the 80s that I used. And I actually had a little business that I would advertise on public access television in my town to string rackets. And man, trying to set up some wooden frames on those old drop weight stringers and trying to get a repeatable outcome was not so much fun. But I learned a lot about setting it up the right way, taking care of the equipment that's so critical. What do you use for gear and how do you maintain it? Like, do you have the stringing manufacturer or the stringing machine manufacturers come in and help set you up? Do they help keep it in shape? How do you maintain that quality control throughout?
We'll refer back to Warren again. Warren, not only with rackets, but machinery. He was building a lot of different stringing machines for manufacturers too. He was very good at teaching me how to take apart a machine, put it back together. So I do all my own maintenance. I've got 2 Prince 5000s that I'm running, and I got a Gamma machine for a back. And then I have an old Echelon crank for when the electric goes down. I can jump on that. That's what I grew up on. I did probably about 20,000 rackets on a crank. So I love the crank. I used to use it all the time. We moved to electric in the later days at Bosworth. I've been on the electric machines ever since now. But I don't deal with too many of the manufacturers. I pretty much know what they know as far as having to fix stuff and do stuff. And I have people come to me to fix their machines once in a while, too. I'll tear them down and fix them.
Yeah, you mentioned the Echelon crank. I had one of those. That was my next machine in the evolution of. And I just felt like when that thing clicked, and it was like so consistent, right? The delivery of tension was consistent every time. Obviously, you get a clamp, make sure it stays, the clamps are well positioned and tight too. But I have a Gamma that I use now because my son played competitively and we just got tired of spending so much money at the stringer. So he's gone off to college. I've maintained the stringer. For the pros, man, they can sense a drop in tension, I imagine, within a matter of minutes.
Yeah, I have a pro player, very good pro player. Made it to, I won't tell you who she was, but she made it to the semifinals of Australia last year and came back after the U.S. Open, and I've been stringing for a couple years now. She said, tension's wrong. Something's wrong. I'm like, okay. So she had a little thing to check her tension on her strings. And we went back and forth for a while. And then we, figured out a tension. The thing is, and I tell a lot of my younger academy players is my stringing might not be right for you, or down the road, you might run into somebody. It's not right or wrong. It's what's right for the player is what I keep telling them. When you find a tension, then that's what you try to do. Nail that. And not so much think that my stringing's better or worse than somebody else's. The player itself has to concentrate on what they need in their hand.
Yeah.
Is there a big discrepancy, Curt, in the tension that you string? Or is there sort of a sweet spot where the majority of your tennis players are within, I don't even know the metrics, a point or two?
Yeah, pounds or kilos. Yeah. These days, I came from the world of natural gut. If anybody out there still uses natural gut, I do have a couple of rec players that use it, but that was very high tension. We did Yvonne and Pete's at like 76 pounds. These days, with the polys and the rackets, everybody's down in the 40s. So there's a huge drop from the 90s and early 2000s to today. It dropped off a lot just because the polys are a lot stiffer. Everybody has to adjust to it.
You mentioned poly, right? Like I grew up, like most players, synthetic gut, and then all of a sudden there was this poly that came out and I had to try it. But I think it's really the biggest revolution in stringing that's happened. Am I right that Babolat created the string specifically for Rafa to help maximize the RPMs, or is that just kind of folklore?
I don't know if that's right or wrong. From my point of view, I remember the actual first player in my book to use it was Gugga at the French Open. And Luxilon was giving us thousands of sets. And it's like we were almost, the drug dealer, literally giving it to players to get them on it. It's been, 25 years or so that they started with this. But people don't realize that poly, that was out in the 70s. It was called Polystar. Babolat actually made Polystar. And that was the first poly. And the guys with the wooden rackets used to use it because it wouldn't break as easy as the gut. But it was so harsh, and with a wooden racket, it was hard to play with. So then Luxilon, my recollection, was the first one out with the poly that people really gravitated to and started playing a lot with. And now they pretty much own the market and everybody followed.
What's the strategy for the weekend player? Because I maintain it is the string more than the racket. Like you could take a 20-year-old racket and put fresh string job in it, and you're going to be happier than if you buy something at Dick's Sporting Goods with terrible nylon in it. You're going to have a better experience. So if somebody comes into you who's just a weekend player, they're digging their gear out for the first time, and they hear on this podcast, all right, string's really important. What do you tell them? Where do you start?
I would tell them that if they're weekend warrior and they're just starting out, poly probably wouldn't be the way to go. Honestly, a lot of it varies with the player itself. If they're big hitters and they want to hit, then poly might be okay. But if they're not, I would stay away from polys and do a synthetic and try it that way. What's going to happen? They're going to leave the string in too long, and then they're going to get arm problems because it's not going to break.
I never break string anymore. It takes a lot. A lot of times I've been playing with like Hyper G, I think 17 or 18 gauge, because again, I'm not going to break it, but I love the bite.
Right.
But I also find it's hard to control a little bit in my Yonex frame. And at my age, it's more about keeping the ball in more than the next guy than it is about hitting big winners, right? That's not the game.
It's hard to string those kind of strings at a higher tension. That's when you're going to get arm problems out of it. If you start getting up into the high 50s and 60s, people are going to start getting arm problems. And that's the way you get controls if you go up. So it's kind of a catch-22 on that.
Right. But with the poly, you want to have a bit of a pocket. If you drop it down like in the 40s, it's going to maintain the tension a little longer and still have that feel, right, that you want.
Most of my pro players are in the mid-40s with poly. So that gives you an idea. And they're really obviously swinging and hitting at that ball. For them to keep it in, it's all in their swing of how to maintain the ball inside the court, too.
Mm-hmm.
Let's pivot into the incredible list and resume you have of all the professional tennis athletes that you've strung rackets for, which is tip of the cap. It's a pretty impressive list. Give us a little peek behind the curtain, if you will, of some of the racket or a racket customization you've done for anyone on tour currently or previously. I've been in sports and entertainment my whole career, and you hear stories of musicians who have to have their Heineken at 43 degrees before a concert. Not 42.
Or no brown M&Ms, Eddie Van Halen.
That's
exactly.
right.
Yep. No
Only
brown or all green M&Ms.
all the green, yeah.
Without disrespecting any of your players or oversharing, give us an idea of a player or someone you've worked with, and maybe you don't have to name names, as to how specific and customized their racket and stringing is or was.
I'll have to go back to my first pro, which was Ivan Lendl that I strung for. He was I think he was the start of this whole idea of taking customization to another level. I think at the time that I started, he would test other players' rackets just to see what they were feeling. I'll give you a little nugget. He took Boris Becker's rackets I had to string up, and he goes, I want to know what Boris is feeling. String him up exactly the same as his, and he went out and hit with them. He was, I would say, the extreme of doing stuff. A couple other guys, Michael Chang, his grips had to be to the millimeter gripped on his racket, otherwise he couldn't hold it.
No shit.
He was playing obviously with the Prince long body, and we would mold the handle on, and then the guy actually who works with me now, John, does all my handle work and weight and bounces. He would have to measure every time he would wrap it one time around to make sure that every wrap was exactly the same. I obviously, you could say they're crazy, but it was their livelihood. You know, you don't send a NASCAR guy out with 4 pounds down on a tire. So that's what they were looking at.
Huh.
So you grip rackets, I'm assuming everything, you would put the Babolat tape on there and everything?
Yeah, exactly. And we actually had feet where we had to hold the grip up to it and make sure that all the marks hit.
Yeah, I mean, they say most sports are a game of inches. I guess with Michael Chang, it's a game of millimeters. You got to love and respect that attention to detail.
There was nobody doing the stuff that we were doing at the time, or probably to this day, nobody still does it, because it just takes so much time. But it's what they want, and that's the service that we were providing at the time.
So Lendl, he went to the nth degree in everything. I mean, he revolutionized training and the amount of fitness in reaction to losing the U.S. Open finals for X number of years in a row, right? And then he dominated. I had heard that he would burn rackets after he played with them. Was that true, or did he just toss them, or?
Not on my watch. He didn't burn any. I got one hanging up on the wall here, so that one definitely didn't get burned. He would, and like every player, I mean, they would go through a crazy amount of rackets. Michael Chang was the highest, obviously. Again, he would go through like 220 in a year. He would use it for a match or two, and then we wouldn't burn them. We'd put them in a box, and they're sitting in a warehouse somewhere now. But same thing, Monica Seles, we would go through a couple hundred for her in a year too. She would get them done and use them, and then they compared the racket to tennis shoes. They wanted them brand new, so they knew what they felt every time they picked it up or put their shoes on. They wanted everything consistent. And go back to the word of consistent from stringing. Everything exactly the same every time. Yeah, I think Ivan was the one that was the first to change racket on ball changes. I think he owns that title. And I tell juniors that, and they look at me like I got 3 heads. What do you mean? Like, well, you have new balls, you should have new strings.
Right. In a match, you'll watch players now, they'll realize, oh, it's second set now. The first set was 6-2. I'm going to get a new racket. Or in the middle of the set, it's 4-all. They'll stop, walk over, grab a new stick, take it out of the plastic, and keep going. And how do their contracts work? I mean, I guess if I'm Prince or Yonex or Wilson and somebody's playing with my gear, I don't care how many rackets they use, but are there any boundaries on how many sticks they can go through in a year? Or
the top players could go through, like Michael Chang was with Prince, and obviously he was their number one player. He could go through as many as he wanted, and they weren't going to say anything. Obviously, when you start going down the ladder in rankings, they're getting a little more finicky. I mean, I've got players now that will only get 12 rackets from a manufacturer a year. So we go 6 through the Wimbledon, and then we go 6 second half of the year that they use, and then start over again in January with them. The majority of the players these days will run anywhere from 12 to 20 at the most. They're not going through them like they did before. And the game has totally changed. I've seen a lot in the past. Players today chase dollars. Players of the past chase trophies. I always live by that. And I tell all the junior players, I go, chase trophies. Trophies bring you money. Yeah, the money has gone up in the game. I think Ivan made $20 million in his whole career. These guys are making that in probably 2 years, 2.5 years. And it's changed with endorsements. Guys are getting pockets of money, and all right, we'll get to the quarterfinals and we'll get out. Just don't have the desire or the passion to do it like they did in the old days. I mean, Pete would have gave his left arm to win 20 Grand Slams. Nate was working with him, and he said after that 14th Grand Slam at Wimbledon or wherever he got it, he goes, he was so exhausted on the floor. He gave everything he possibly could have. These guys aren't doing that these days. I can see it and feel it, and it's just too much money, too quick.
Yeah. Well, on that topic, Peter mentioned we met with your friend John Butler last time, and he has a lot of very strong opinions about how to fix the tour. And I'm curious what your thoughts are if we can segue into the game a little bit. We kind of all reached the conclusion it's too fractured, right? You turn on the TV on the weekend, there could be players that you want to watch, and they're spread all over the globe. You have no idea how to watch them, what they're playing for a tournament. What are your thoughts on how could you improve the game so that the people that are playing are chasing trophies and not just a career and money?
I think, and I'm going to get some probably pushback on this, the sponsorship money as far as endorsements is what's really hampering the tours, the men especially. I think if that gets cut back, the players has to earn his money instead of it's given to them. And when you got a guy that has to earn it and go out and grind and do it, then you're going to see a lot better competition than somebody that's going to go out there with 20 million in his pocket and get to the second or third round and they're down a set and a half and they're checking out and they got the plane on the tarmac before the match is over. So I think everybody needs to make money. Obviously, I understand that, but it's the corporations who are fighting over this I want this guy. And I've seen it all the time. Companies buying out companies' contracts to move on to the next, and the players just sitting back, and obviously they got the upper hand on it, but they don't understand that it's not good business for them in the long run. If I was in that position and somebody offered me 20 million, I guess I would take it too. But that's something I don't know how it would be resolved, that the corporations could back out on the sponsorships. But I think that, to me personally, that's the downfall of the competition, of people getting too much money too early and not worrying about the game itself.
Yeah.
I feel like you could say that about a lot of other sports too, like NIL money in college football. We're talking about Ohio State earlier, go Bucks. And it's a shame that these quarterbacks, coming out of high school, the first question is, well, how much money can I make by going to an Ohio State or Texas or Southern Cal or Michigan?
Right.
It's a shame that the tail's starting to wag the dog a little bit in athletics, and to hear it from you in tennis too is a little bit of a shame. But
Yep, for sure.
there's a balance there, I think.
So, Curt, do you have a client that's playing in the French Open, and maybe you could talk about your thoughts setting them up for that tournament versus the grass court season? Or is it really just keep the frame and the string the same, and I'll worry about the nuance of the surface?
No, a lot of the players that I work with are on board with what we've done in the past. Same thing with Yvonne. He would switch up everything between string, tensions, grips, and going from clay to grass. And because you're dealing with two different surfaces, obviously, and the ball's going to react different. I've got one player that I'm working with. We went to an open pattern for the clay, and he's going to switch back to a dense pattern once he gets off the clay. The strings, same thing. We went to a thinner gauge. We're going back to a thicker gauge when he gets back onto hard courts. There are little tweaks like that we do, and a lot of that feedback information comes from the players themselves. A lot of people will ask me, retail players or anybody would ask me, what's the perfect racket for me? And I'm like, and everybody always takes it as a cop out that I don't know what I'm talking about, but I can't tell you what to play. The perfect racket for you would be, let's see, Roger played with Wilson, Djokovic played with Head, Nadal plays with Babolat. So there's not a perfect racket out there. God's racket doesn't exist, even though Prince wanted it. It's all personal preference in that sort, that I tell them, you got to go test rackets. I mean, you can go walk into probably any pro shop and get a couple demos and go play. Unfortunately, the demos are strung probably 6 months ago, but you still can get a feel for a racket if you do something like that. But getting back to your point, yeah, I do have players that will switch it up. They'll switch tensions and maybe go thinner string when you get on the grass or thicker when you're on the clay, stuff like that. Well, his manufacturer makes them for him. First of all, the manufacturer, when you get a ranking and they like you, they kind of bend over backwards for you. And second of all, he's kind of a crazy guy. So he's off the rails a little bit, like majority of tennis players.
We are, yes. I stand accused, guilty. Curt, talk about the difference between a racket you see at Dick's Sporting Goods versus what you get or the tour players are getting directly from the manufacturer. Because I know that there's a lot of nuance in between.
Yeah, in the old days, like Pete Sampras used to play with Pro Staff, and his Mizuno was actually molded out of the Adidas that he played with. A lot of the players in the old days, the racket that they grew up with was the racket they played till probably retirement. Leighton Hewitt, we did rackets for him. He played with the Yonex, the RD, whatever it was at that time. They painted it 6 different cosmetics. It was the same racket out of the same mold. That's what you're getting from the pro end of it, that they're playing with the racket basically that they grew up on. The rackets that you're going to get at Dick's, I kind of call them toys, because a retail racket and a pro racket, some of them are very close to each other. Some of them are so far off. I mean, some are aluminum, some will have plastic in them. If you go in and get a Djokovic racket off the wall and a Djokovic racket in his hand, obviously they're two different things. The Djokovic racket that he's playing with was probably the one he played with when he was 16. He's been playing with it for 20 years or whatever it is now. So that's going to be the biggest difference in between pros and a retail racket. Some of the retail rackets are okay. Mostly they're a little bit cheaper made. They don't put as much resin in it when they're making it in the fiberglass, carbon fibers and different things like that they add into it. But obviously for price points, they have to make them a little bit cheaper, but they paint them the same and people kind of get fooled on it and they buy it.
The pro rackets are pro stock, right? Is that what they call them? They refer to them? Or because I see them listed sometimes like on eBay or Facebook Marketplace.
Some manufacturers will say that, yeah, that they're pro stock, but some of them are in the wording. You got to pay attention to it, because what they say and what they are could be two different things, but they're skating on thin ice and they can get around it by the way they do the wording on them.
Yeah. What are the different elements that you consider in customizing a racket? In particular, I'm curious to know more about the grip and what you do for different players.
Yeah, there's basically 3 elements to customizing a racket, which is the weight and balance of the racket / the swing weight, and the handle, which is actually the physical handle that we do. We usually can either build it up or take it down depending on what the client needs. The gripping is huge too, because obviously that's the start point of what you're going to feel in the racket. So the weight and balance end of it is, we've noticed over the last 10, 15 years that swing weights are a huge factor now. 25, 30 years ago when we started, swing weight wasn't even a part of the process of a weight and balance. It was just the weight and the balance of the racket. Swing weight is what you actually feel when you're swinging the racket. It's obviously the balance has a lot to do too, because the old hammer racket, Wilson hammer rackets that they had, they took everything out of the handle and made them exactly the same, made it feel like a hammer. But the swing weights is what everybody is kind of concentrating on now. You still have the weight and balance that you got to make, and for our pros, we make them from the factory. Coming out of the factory, everybody's plus or minus probably 5 to 10 grams, high or low. So we kind of zone in and get their model spec, and then we can make that. The handles, like I said, we could either build it up or shave it down to what we go half sizes on the handles. We could put a Wilson handle on a Babolat. There's all different kinds of setups that you can do with handles. As far as we've had people go, I like my Prince handle, but I have a Wilson, and we do that kind of stuff too. Head handles are notoriously what we call flat. Prince are round, like a baseball bat. Babolat's kind of in the middle of that. Wilson's kind of in the middle of that. So there's a lot of little things that we could tweak on the sides on each bevel to make them the way the client needs it. The gripping, a lot in the old days was leather with an overgrip on it. These days, guys are going with a synthetic grip with an overgrip on it now. So the leathers, we used to put them on and roll them with like a wallpaper roller, so it would be consistent of each one, and the grip wouldn't smash down as much as if you rolled them out.
Yeah. I used to play with a Borg Pro at one point in my career, and that grip was just amazing because I have a two-handed backhand, a longer grip. Yep. And then I got hooked on the leather. And I used to play with this guy in the summer. He's this older guy that loved to hit with me. And I just would marvel. He'd grab his racket, and before we went out and played, he would take the lid, the aluminum that you peel off the can of balls, and he'd use that to scratch up the entire grip, almost like putting pine tar in a baseball bat. And then to me, it was like sacrilege. So I'm like, what are you doing? You're destroying your racket. But that was what he did to get that kind of texture that he wanted. And I just think it's interesting to watch all these different players, right? The most famous one is, of course, the French guy. I can't think of his name at the moment, but with the one-hander that can change his grip like in 10 seconds on the sidelines. But he's got the butt cap built up.
Not Stan.
No, shoot, who's the French guy who's like late 30s, end of his career?
Demoneur?
No, I'll come back to this.
It's the Lone Pine. It's the Lone Pine Juice Punch.
Felnikov had a butt cap like that too.
He did?
Yeah, we call it the hockey butt cap, and we've done a few of those. I actually have a female player in the top 30 that we wrap her butt cap, and then we wrap the grip over it so it feels like a little bit of a hockey puck or a hockey stick end on it.
Yeah, because I had a pro tell me that at one point that the two fingers that matter are like your thumb and your index finger. That's it. Everything else is along for the ride. And it was a bit of a abstract concept for me to wrap my head around, but his whole point was you want the racket to move kind of naturally in your hands to where it should be positioned. And it's not something that, you don't want it to be sticky. It's got to move freely. He described it, this one pro, as like a wind foil. And he said Federer never changed his grip. The racket just moved in his hands when he switched sides, which I've got to go back and look at video. But I don't know. Does that sound like, it sounded a little bit kind of like space aliens to me, but is that the case?
No, it is. It is. A lot of it is, because the one job that I had when I first started in this business was molding handles. We would do custom molds for all the top pro players that we were dealing with at the time. And then obviously mentioning Michael Chang again with the gripping, where his fingers would lay. And you're dealing with the best of the best, the high end of this sport. And these guys are so sensitive. They're hitting, 1,000 balls a day. They feel every little thing. They feel every little bump in the road. So they know exactly what they're doing and talking about. And all those little quirks, once they get them figured out, everything from there on has to be exactly the same and consistent.
Richard Gasquet, that's the name I was trying to come up with.
Gasquet, yeah.
I got one last question for you, Curt. So Norm and I and our good friends here at Studio Portland and yourself, we're all sitting on the couch. We're going to segue here into the French Open here shortly, which we're pretty ecstatic about with Rafa's career coming to an end. But we're all sitting on the couch with you and we're watching the French Open. I'm curious as to know, how do you watch a Grand Slam event or a major tournament? Are you staring at the rackets the entire time? Like the three of us, Ryan, Studio Portland, Norm and I are all there with you. And I'd love to watch the sport through your eyes as someone who is so into attention to a detail with the equipment. How do you watch a tournament like the French Open in regards to the equipment and the rackets that you're stringing that are actually in the tournament?
I will start off with the tennis that I do watch would be my own clientele. I don't really pay too much attention to other players, obviously with my schedule. And this is a 7-day, almost 20 hours a day. When I do watch my players, I will watch more because I know that the racket and the tool that they have in their hand is made for them and perfect for them. I'm more in tune to their mental of what they're doing. And a lot of people don't understand. I try to take the tool that I give them and make their mental part of their game more confident. And I did this with Magna Lynette. We went and we changed her racket a year and a half ago from Babolat to Yonex. She lost a couple things in her game, but the mental part she was struggling with prior to that 2 years, working with her coach, Mark. I said, she's got to get her brain wrapped around this. So we put this in. She had a couple good outings with the Yonex, and losing what she lost didn't even matter because what she gained mentally from that racket, it pushed her obviously to the semifinals of Australia. And I want to tune into that, make sure that the tool that we have in their hand, not only that they can hit this forehand or that backhand or whatever particular stroke they're doing, but if they're confident in it. If they're not confident in that racket to do it, then it doesn't matter how many balls they hit a day, how hard they train, everything else, it doesn't matter what we can do here for them. So
yeah, man, is that such a huge part of the sport right now? One of the nuances and changes, innovations at the French Open this year is the attention to the mental health of the players and all the resources and all the tennis alumni that are actually available to the players beforehand, right after their respective matches, before they do the post-match press conferences. So that to me is one of the biggest issues in the sport, is the mental health of these players, as we're seeing with the Naomi Osakas of the world and our good buddy Kyrgios, who we love so much. That's really nice to hear. I'll translate that in saying that the less they're thinking about their racket and their equipment, the better. The more you're giving them the strength and the confidence to win the freaking match and play the next day.
Because you got to realize there's only so much space in your brain, and you don't want to be using it up worrying about what's in your hand. My thinking is they have to concentrate and focus on their strategy and what they're doing against the opponent across the net, not thinking about, oh, my shoe's untied, my grip's coming loose. Those little things are gone once you get to a level that the top players are at. And you have companies like mine and Nate's and other companies that are making sure that doesn't even come into play, when you get into matches and Grand Slams and, finals.
So if in the example you gave, like if Magda's playing in the French, will a stringer ever call you and say, hey, Curt, help me get this set up just right? To your point, we want to make her focused on the match and the player, not the instrument.
Well, I've never talked to any tournament stringers. I talked to coaches. With her coach, Mark, we'll at the beginning of the year, go over a game plan, same thing with, okay, we're going to go with 6 new rackets. Then we're going to switch out when they get back from Wimbledon or whatever. Now it's kind of messed up with the Olympics. And then obviously we have a strategy for going hard courts, going to clay, going to grass, and then going back to the hard courts. Even going from Australia hard courts to US Open hard courts, the weather's different. Humidity comes into play, different things like that we kind of look at. I had one player come out of Europe, go to Miami and call me and said the ball's going everywhere, the humidity, this and that.
Help me, Curt. Help me. Save me.
And I literally became a weatherman that day.
Right. Relative humidity.
So it gets tricky, and the tricky part is trying to figure out what the player's thinking and trying to get inside their head a little bit and figure out that puzzle of what was going to make them click. And luckily we did that, like I said, for Magda when she went to semifinals. It works out.
Very cool. Last question I have, I imagine you know the answer. Talk about the urban myth of catgut being used, or sheep intestines, in back in the day as the original source of material for strings. Was that true, or is that just ballyhoo?
Now I can't deny or confirm back in the 1930s if they used catgut or not, but I know that they were using, and leading back to Warren, that he was very big into gut, and he actually produced with another gentleman out of your guys' area, Australia. They were trying to rival Babolat at the time back in the early 90s. It's all I know, and it's always been cow gut, cow intestines.
Well, and what's the process? How do they convert what's inside a cow's stomach into...
I've seen video of it. Anybody can Google it. And if they Google Babolat gut or Babolat, manufacturing gut, they have a video out. They did a very well documentary on it, that basically you take the guts out of the cow. And the reason they use cow guts is because it's the longest intestine without them having to tie it together or sew it together.
Yeah. Okay.
So they stretch this stuff, and the process that they go through is amazing. And I understand why it's $55, $60 a set now, because they send it through machine after machine, and then they center grind it, then they twist it, and then they salt it, and then they coat it, and then they package it. If you got 20 minutes to watch, I'm sure you can find it on YouTube or Google somewhere. But it's always been cow intestines for sure.
Okay, now this is really my last question. The balls. I've heard so much about the balls, right? And the players complaining about the balls, tournament to tournament, being different.
Right.
They're causing injuries. I personally think it's nonsense. I've played with every single ball out there. Yeah, they're different. Service is different. Every time you walk in the court, the conditions are different. But how do you guys react to that and your ability to control the mental aspect of the game for the player? How do you get that out of their mind? How do they just focus on the racket?
Well, I did dip into it a little bit a year ago, I think, maybe or so. Not so much on the men's tour, but on the women's tour, I had one girl that I worked with, and she did get an injury off the ball. I was stringing for her when she's local, and she was doing a hybrid with gut and poly. And then they ended up going all gut when they were on the road in the middle of the summer. She got the injury down in Australia a year ago, and she kept playing through it. The read back that I got from it, they changed the ball supposedly to the men's ball on the women's tour so they could all be unified, because that's the push today. Everybody wants to be the same. And the ball was too heavy for them. So my client, and I heard through the grapevine, I talked to the coach as usual, and he's telling me she's got a problem, shoulder's hurting, what do we do? I go down tension a little bit. Long story short, they ended up going gut, and she was stringing it at 35 pounds.
Wow.
I'm like, who is she, McEnroe? I mean, this is ridiculous.
Yes, seriously.
But she ended up being on the shelf for a year from this ball. And then I did talk to higher ranked players. There was 2 or 3 higher ranked players that aren't my clients that wanted this ball because it favored their game. So there was a little in battle with the WTA, and I think that they have it under control. And conversations with the players of why don't they use the same ball for every tournament? Obviously, there's different conditions, so you have to change it for that. There's different sponsorships. You have to change it for that. So I think Wilson and Penn were kind of ruling the world with tennis balls, and nobody else was out there. There was no issues. Now you've got a lot of different hands in it. And some of the players are getting hurt from it. And some, it favors some of the players. But it's legit that ball that they used a year or so ago on the women's tour was messing up a majority of the women on tour.
Because it was too heavy and just like it was like lifting more weights than they're used to, essentially, right? I mean,
right. They weren't used to it, obviously. It was such a big change that it just, and the client that I was working with, she's smaller and not as strong. And so there's a lot of things to play into her particular situation. But I think they got their stuff together now and trying to figure it out. But it came down from the top 10 women. They said, yeah, we want to use this. And they kind of ruled it then. And then now I think WTA is reeling back on that a little bit and trying to figure out what to do with them.
Well, Curt, this has been a fascinating conversation. I can't wait to slice this up and put it out there. I think a lot of people are going to be really interested in hearing what you have to say because, as Bill Clinton said, it's the economy, stupid. It's the string, stupid. I really believe that. And people need to understand that, yeah, get a racket you like, try a bunch out, whatever feels good, but make sure you have the right string and stick with it.
Like you're saying, the string is probably... If I had the name between string, handle, grip, I would have to probably go string, racket, handle, grip, if you had to put them in an order. The bigger question, Pete, is what the Buckeyes going to do this year.
Oh, wait, brother.
Oh, wait.
Man, this has been an awesome conversation, Curt. Thank you so much for your time. I got a feeling you could write a pretty good book. And if and when you would ever write a book, let us know. We'll throw it out to our listeners and our fans and help you promote it any way you can. This is going to be a New York Times bestseller, hopefully.
I don't know if we'll get there with that, but it should be. It's not an Andre Agassi book, but it'll have some little nuggets in here and there. We'll see.
You know what it could be, Curt? Your book could be The Winning Ugly that Brad Gilbert wrote. That's like the manual that people keep in their bag and they always refer back to.
Yeah.
Yeah, we might be able to see it on a bag check somewhere.
Yes, that's right. Or a movie. Tennis movies are the rage, right? Everybody's wanting to see challengers. I've heard it's actually pretty good. Yeah.
I will say I did paint. We do custom painting too. Yeah. I've done over 3,000 custom paint jobs. And we did have a movie production company call me, and I had to paint 4 new head rackets to look like the old Radical blue and green ones.
Oh, yeah.
That's awesome.
The movie that they were making was from the late 90s.
Huh.
Yeah.
It's nice to see people paying attention to detail like that. Usually in a movie, they throw people out there that don't even know what they're doing, and it's fairly obvious. But
yeah, that was a treat. I'm still waiting for the movie to come out because BG was in on that one.
So, he was? Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Well, listen, brother, I really enjoyed the conversation. We'll have to send you some Lone Pine Juice Punch Hazy India Pale Ale as a thank you parting gift.
Definitely.
Open invite to come up and see us in Maine, although we're not maybe the tennis mecca up here.
In the summer, though, man, there's no place better in the summer. You got to escape that Delray heat. Come up here.
Or if you want to come down to Delray, just make sure it's in November, December, January, or February, because right now we're going to hit 100 tomorrow.
Are you
That's
really?
unbelievable.
Wow. Yeah.
You were saying it's spring there. It's summer here now. It just kicked in this week.
Yeah. Well, all the Delray boys come back to Maine right around now. So that's my connection.
Yeah.
You got to join them.
Exactly. Appreciate you guys having me on, man.
All right,
Thanks,
Curt.
brother.
Have a good one.
We could go for another hour. Like,
know,
he just kept giving us some nuggets.
Yeah.
I mean, the peek behind the curtain to me is just the attention to detail and how competitive all these sports are. And tennis, just the nuances. And what's sticking with me is Lendl. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer, right?
That's amazing to think that he thought, like, I want to know what my opponent is feeling.
Love that.
Yeah.
I love Lendl already. I mean, he's already on a pedestal for me, but then to know that kind of attention to detail.
It'd be like Belichick always wanted to take away the best player or the team's like greatest strengths. And so he had to think like that team.
Right.
And this is Ivan Lendl playing mind tricks way back when. I mean, that guy, he was a machine.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's like these NBA players who a lot of them study their opponents, everything that's on their Wikipedia page, their family's names, their kids' names, their ex-girlfriends' names, ex-wives' names in some cases, and they'll be trash talking the entire game just to get in their head and get a little bit of a strategic advantage.
Thank you, Wikipedia. That's funny.
Yeah.
Careful what you put out there.
Right. Thank you again to Lone Pine and their Juice Punch Hazy India Pale Ale, which is helping keeping us quenched through this episode of Breaking Back. We want to thank our presenting sponsor in Lone Pine and their new Juice Punch Hazy IPA, which you can read more about on lonepinebrewery.com. And again, if you're in Maine, feel free to head to Old Orchard Beach or Rock Row in Westbrook to try it on draft, as well as Lone Pine's new vodka and some new yummy foods they've added to their menus this year, including some crafted pizzas, some lobster flights, and some red snappas.
Red Snappas. I think we need some vodka for our Wimbledon preview. We can mix it with some sort of strawberry elixir.
Yeah, we'll get a seltzer sponsor. Sounds good.
Wimbledon needs an alternative to the U.S. Open's, what's that?
It's the melon drink.
The melon drink, yeah.
Yeah, I've had friends that apparently say they go down like water. I'm drinking 8 to 10 of them. I think those drinks go down well at the tournament.
The melon, what do they call the melon?
It's a honeydew melon drink. I don't know. It looks great.
Honeydew
It's like
Slam.
the strawberry dish. All these tournaments have their respective nuanced beverage or food option.
It's the Honey Deuce. The U.S. Open Honey Deuce
Honey Deuce.
is made with Grey Goose. So, Lone Pine aficionados, let's come up with a Wimbledon drink and brand it accordingly. And who knows, if our listeners send in some good ideas, you may influence Lone Pine's product roadmap, and maybe we'll win you some Lone Pine swag. So send your ideas to breakingbackpod@gmail.com, and we'll see what happens. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe to Breaking Back on your favorite podcast platform. And be sure to follow us on X and Instagram at Breaking Back Pod.